that were out on the edges of the field were not to be gleaned. That is, they were not harvested completely. Instead, they were left out there in the open for the migrating stranger who was passing through, for the itinerant, like Jesus and his disciples, as well as for the local homeless and for the poor, so that they would have something to eat and not lose face by begging. So in the context of village life, the first man in the parable, the one who welcomes the visitor into his home in the middle of the night, is doing the right thing. He's doing the acceptable God thing. He's doing it Jesus' way. However, he has no bread. His is apparently a poor household, which is unprepared to host a visitor. And yet the man still wants to show hospitality to this unexpected guest. His attitude, his behavior upheld the village's expectation, upheld it with honor. He was acting faithfully like Father Abraham. He was being true to Torah traditions, and he was holding his and the village's reputation with integrity. What that first man did was entirely in keeping with faithful biblical expectations and cultural norms of traditional village life. His reluctant neighbor, on the other hand, was shamefully disrespecting them by saying, "Do not bother me." The villager may have been shocked by his neighbor's refusal, but he wasn't silenced by it. He keeps on asking. He keeps on knocking. Apparently once is not enough. Some commentators see in this parable an example of the need to be persistent in prayer, just as they do in that parable about the widow who won't cease pestering the judge until he renders a verdict in her case. That's also a parable in Luke chapter 18. The sleeping neighbor in this parable, who has to be bullied out of bed, is seen analogous to the unjust judge in the other parable, because they both are reluctant to do what is the right thing in the first place. Unlike our contemporary callousness toward people who are in need, people in Jesus' audience would have been shocked by the man's statement, "Do not bother me." They would have felt the public shame this disgruntled neighbor might bring to their neighborhood when he refuses to help if he could do so. This is, after all, a request for bread, the staff of life, the very stuff of life. And he says, "No, don't bother me. It's not my problem." "The door is now shut," was the man's second reply. "My children are with me in bed. I cannot get up and give you anything." And yet the neighbor keeps knocking, keeps seeking, keeps asking. William Herzog, who was one of my professors when I worked on my Doctor of Ministry degree, says in his 1994 book, Parables as Subversive Speech, he quotes page 198, "To Palestinian peasants, rooted in the values of village life, it would have been simply inconceivable that a neighbor who had been awakened to help fulfill the obligations of hospitality would try to excuse himself from helping by offering flimsy rationalizations. He would be shamed if he did so. He and his family would lose face in the village." Unquote. Well, in the end, the man got out of bed, unlocked the door, and gave the bread to his neighbor. Apparently, the man's shameless persistence, the pestering, or what our Bible calls importunity or impudence, convinced his neighbor that further resistance was impossible, useless. As Pheme Perkins put it in her 1981 book on parables, which I read back in seminary, but I remember this particular thing she said. She said, "Maybe friendship will not motivate your neighbor to get up and get what you need, but a little persistent inconvenience will." She expresses well what Jesus himself says at this point in the parable. He says, I tell you, though he will not get up and give him anything because he is his friend, yet because of his importunity, he will rise and give him whatever he needs. Jesus' dismissal of friendship as a motivator of right behavior gave me pause and made me realize the word friend was actually used 3 times at the start of the parable. Jesus begins by asking, which one of you who has a friend will go to him at midnight and say to him, friend, lend me 3 loaves, for a friend of mine has arrived on a journey and I have nothing to set before him. Friend, the Greek word is philos. It's one form of love. 3 times, friend, my friend, friend. Apparently, friendship is not sufficient to motivate right behavior if it risks inconveniencing the superior party. Don't bother me. Now, let me take a moment, if I may, to point out that we have lately seen well-known celebrities and powerful politicians claim as friends their lawyers, their colleagues, maybe some beautiful women, high-ranking officials, rich donors, only to turn around a bit later and disrespect them, publicly disavow even having ever known them, speaking rudely about them as losers or worse, when they no longer bow and kowtow to the ego of their so-called superior friend. I think that happens because philos love, that is friendship, thrives best among people of like mind. People who care about the same kinds of things, like your family members do, or like your political base. People who agree with your opinion, who are ready to support one another in a reciprocal way because their success depends upon mutual cooperation without any rivalry. If there was truly friendship between these neighbors in Jesus' parable, each one would supply whatever was needed to uphold the honor of the other. Tit for tat, scratch my back, quid pro quo. Because of their mutual concern to uphold each other's honor in the community, a friend would not refuse anything that's asked in appropriate circumstances. So with this real-world context in mind, Jesus' saying, which appeared at first so unlimited and unconditional, encouraging us to ask, you'll get it, seek, you'll find it, knock, and we'll open the door. Maybe he means for every friend who asks, they receive. When friends seek together, they find. And to every friend who knocks, it will be opened. When the man came to the door and said, friend, lend me 3 loaves. Such a request, made direct, made urgent in the middle of the night, indicates to me the closeness of a friendship. Not impudence, not rudeness, not obnoxiousness. Asking to borrow the bread not only means he will repay what he owes, you'll get it back again, not those same loaves, they'll be eaten. But it acknowledges the inherent mutuality involved in their friendship, this willingness to reciprocate. Give me now what I need, I'll get it back to you when you need. What I mean is, we do for our friends things we expect them to do for us in return, if the situation was reversed. Isn't that what the golden rule says we're supposed to do? Jesus' ultimate ethical rule is that we should treat everyone as though they were family members or as though they were friends, whoever they are, wherever they are on their life's journey, and whenever they come knocking at our door. Their friendship should have been sufficient for the man to want to provide the necessary bread. It was what was expected with no excuses. So in the first place, Jewish village life would expect the neighbor to respond with hospitality, if possible, because the honor of their community was otherwise at stake. Second, their mutual friendship ought to have been reason enough to give the man the bread when he first asked. But the reluctant neighbor is shameless in both regards. Neither the honor of friendship nor the honor of his community mattered to him. Don't bother me. In Jesus' view, then, the social expectation that we, who call ourselves Christians, followers of Jesus, that we offer hospitality, even if it's as little a thing as 3 loaves of bread, should triumph over all the other petty, miserly, self-centered reasons we have to rationalize why we don't have to do so. The disrespectful shamelessness in this parable is not the persistent petitioner, but the householder who didn't want to give the bread. And I think it's wrong to see in him a metaphor of God, because Jesus' experience of God was the exact opposite of this reluctant neighbor in the parable. In other words, if you ask God for something, you need not be afraid. Go ahead and ask. It's not like asking a superior. It's asking a friend. God is ready. God is able. God is willing to help out. Just ask. Go ahead, ask. Don't be afraid of God. No fear of God here. Love God. Go to God. Listen to God. Walk with God. What a friend we have in Jesus. So ask. If you need something, bring your request to God. And Jesus said God desires